Hi guys, it's Crystal. I hope you guys are all doing well today and that you've had a good week. Summer's finally here, summer vacation. So I will be switching around my video schedule, I guess. I used to do it on Saturdays. I will probably be doing it throughout the week. This video may take a little bit of time to upload though, guys, because you know it's going to be really long. My last one was, but I think this one will be even longer. So I'm sorry guys, but there's just a lot of information to get through. I said before that I thought that this series was going to be 3 parts. It might actually be 4. There's a lot of information on Ted Bundy, so I'm trying to give it all to you. You guys already know that I've been using The Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule and The Phantom Prince by Liz Kendall. You know, Kendall is a pseudonym, just to get most of my information from. I find that it's easier doing it that way than actually looking through articles, just because these people actually knew Ted Bundy, so they may have more insight than we do. So if you guys are new to this channel, like I said, my name is Crystal and I do Canadian true crime or true crime with a Canadian twist. I know you guys are probably wondering, then why am I touching on Ted Bundy? From time to time, I will do international crimes, especially if they have been recommended to me or if somebody asked me to do them. So I will do them. I'm not as knowledgeable about American places, so hopefully I'm saying things right. But anyway, if that sounds like something that you guys want to be part of, hopefully you will hit that old like button. Hopefully you'll hit the subscribe button if you already haven't. Share if you want to. Leave me some comments. I always love to hear other people's theories, particularly about what we think Ted Bundy is. I'm not going to really touch on that as much until probably the last video, guys. You know that's usually when I give my wrap up, if you've been here before. And if you guys are returning subscribers, you guys already know how much I love you and how thankful I am that you guys choose to subscribe to me and let me do my thing. So I'm very, very thankful for you guys. There's not going to be that much of an introduction like always, although I am wearing my Reagan and Bush shirt. It's ironic, guys, so don't come for me. It's an ironic shirt, just for the American theme. So like I said, guys, we're not going to spend too much into the intro from it. You guys already know the last thing we touched upon was Ted's confirmed kills. He had started in January of 1974. We talked about his life already, so we're going to move on and talk about his other kills now. These videos are for entertainment or educational purposes only, so if you guys do choose to leave a comment, please, 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 no hate. There's already enough hate out there in the world. We don't need to add any more to it. So, Ted Bundy, and you guys know that I'm going to have to refer to my notes. I've got like 27 pages on this one. Also, just a little thing for you guys, if you've ever noticed me squinting a lot or that I have to get really close to the paper, it's because in real life I wear glasses. And for these videos, I don't. So hopefully we'll be able to make it through. Just give me 1 second. So we already talked about 1974 and how in January he had started attacking girls. Remember that Karen Sparks did not die. I do want to also put forth, guys, that I can't focus as much on the victims as I usually do, just because there's so many of them and these videos are so long already. So I do apologize for that. It wasn't my angle to make Ted the star of this, but it is his life story, so I have to. Sorry guys, I'm still getting to it. So, Ted Bundy. On April 17th, oh, I do also want to tell you guys, I'm not sure if I said it in the last video, but the woman we refer to as Stephanie Brooks, that is a pseudonym, guys. That was Ted's first love, supposedly, if he can even feel it, and the girl that he went on to get revenge on, and may have started triggering this rash of killings. I am of the school that believes that Ted Bundy started killing long before 1974, particularly because he seemed to know what he was doing. I'm just saying. So on April 17th of 1974, 18-year-old Susan Elaine Rancourt went missing. Now, she was a student, she was actually a freshman at Central Washington State College, which is in Ellensburg. And that's about 193 kilometers from Seattle, where Ted was based, let's just say. Ted Bundy was actually known to drive hundreds of kilometers to make a kill if he wanted to, and you guys will understand later on. She went missing. Now, she was actually different than his previous victims, guys, because she had blonde hair this time. However, and the previous ones had dark hair. However, she wore it down, she wore it long, and she wore it parted in the middle. There are a couple of other things to know about Susan. Number one, she was extremely nearsighted. So this may have affected how she dealt with Ted. And that night, the night she disappeared on April 17th, she wasn't wearing her glasses and she didn't have her contacts in. Number two is that Susan was actually well versed in karate. She was very good at it. So seems to me he was picking on some powerful people here, but he was somehow able to subdue her. It could have been the fact that she wasn't wearing her glasses, so she couldn't particularly see that well. Number three is that Susan was a very cautious person. A lot of the girls we're talking about are, in fact, all of them are. I know what you guys are saying. Some of them are hitchhikers, but they were also cautious about the person or persons they chose to get rides from. It may be just a coincidence, but she was an extremely very cautious person. In fact, she wouldn't go out alone at night at all unless she had either a roommate or a friend with her. Everybody remembers this. She seemed to be afraid to be out at night alone. Even though she knew karate, she still had that urge not to be outside by herself at night. However, on August 17th, she did choose, I should say, to go out and be alone that night. Now, the reason being was that there was a giant meeting going on to discuss future RAs. Do we still call them that? Resident advisors? You know, like the house mothers or fathers for the freshman year in a dormitory. She wanted to get that position. It would help her financially and it would give her more credit. So she wanted to go out for that position. However, her leaving by herself proved to be fatal to her. So Susan had talked to people. She was seen. She was actually supposed to go to a film that night, which of course she didn't make it to. She also had a load of laundry that she was doing, and somebody had come in and dumped the load because they needed the washing machine on top of another machine. So her laundry was found the next day. But because she was so cautious, people knew immediately that she had disappeared. Number one, she'd missed the film. She'd never done that before. Number two, the laundry. Number three, the next day she was missing classes. These were all things that Susan Rancourt had never done before. So when she went missing, it was taken very seriously. Now, when Susan went missing, they started to get, police and newspapers, of course, at that time, started to get information from other students on campus. Informations about strange sightings that they had seen. These were not threatening sightings in any way. They were just ramped up due to the fact that people had gone missing. So people described seeing a young man, a young handsome man with brownish wavy hair who had his arm in a cast. And he was carrying a briefcase, which he was dropping a lot due to his injury. So he was asking for people to help him carry the briefcase. In other scenarios, this same man, he was always generally described the same way, was also asking for help starting his car. And in fact, there were a couple people that did go to his car with him, but when they looked inside, they noticed that the passenger seat was actually missing in the car. This is something that Ted Bundy was known to do. It was probably easier for him to transport a victim this way. So these reports started coming out. And they were good in a way because, number one, they would develop a description of the man. They didn't have a composite yet. This was developing a description of the man. And they also noted his vehicle. It was a 1968, not 1969. I said 69 last week. Sorry, guys. That was a blip on my own radar. But it was a 1968 Volkswagen Beetle. So, I mean, it's good to have a description of a perpetrator, even though it was a very general description. I mean, Ted looked like thousands of other men at that point in time. But they did have a description of a car at this point. Police filed reports from these students, these various students that came to them, but they didn't really take much heed of it. They didn't take much notice of it at that point in time. So on May 6th of 1974, Roberta Kathleen Parks went missing. She actually went by the name Kathy, so we're going to refer to her by the name Kathy, not by Roberta. And she actually went missing from the Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon. So that is about 402, yeah, that's quite a ways, kilometers away from Seattle. Like I said, he was known to travel very vast distances. Now this could be a way to get police off the radar of him. So she went missing. Kathy was 20 years old. She had long brown hair. It was actually brownish blonde hair. And of course, it was worn down and parted in the middle. She had gone out to meet friends for coffee that night, or she was supposed to go out and meet friends for coffee that night. And she actually told her roommate she'd be back within the hour. However, she never showed up for that coffee date with friends at all. She disappeared actually into thin air. Nobody was around. Nobody saw her go missing. It wasn't like with Susan Rancourt where there was reports of a strange man on campus or reports of an odd instances. We'll just say odd instances. It wasn't like that at all. Nobody saw her disappear, but she basically went missing within an hour. Most of the detectives involved in Kathy's case, because it was in Oregon, am I saying it right? I always say Oregon. I hope I'm saying it right. Most detectives involved with her case did not believe her case was linked up with the missing and attacked women in Washington state because it was so far away, right? It was in Corvallis. However, one detective named Herb Swindler, I'm not going to use a lot of the detectives' names, just a couple of the really big ones that you guys will know of. Herb Swindler did believe that the cases were connected some way. I mean, you had the same type of people. They were all young women, all long hair, parted in the middle, all studious. They were all above average intelligence, and they were all disappearing from around a university district. So he was able to connect that, whereas most other detectives weren't. At some point on the night of May 31st to the early morning hours of June 1st of 1974, Brenda Carol Ball, age 22, disappeared. Now, Brenda was actually a lot like Donna Manson in the fact that she, oh, sorry guys, you're hearing Lola right now. I'm gonna have to let her out. She was in the bedroom, but now she doesn't want to be, so just give me 1 second. So Brenda Ball disappeared. Now, like I said, she was a lot like Donna Manson in the fact that she didn't mind hitchhiking. Once again, she was cautious of the people that she hitchhiked with. But you guys already know that a lot of people in the 60s, 70s, 80s, they would hitchhike. It didn't seem like anything wrong to them. This was a case that actually alerted people to not hitchhike. But at that point in time, it was common practice. So she was living with 2 roommates in Burien, which is about 21 minutes away from Seattle. And she had been previously going to school. She had actually gone to Highline Community College, but had stopped going for whatever reason. I don't know if it was graduation or anything like that. She had just stopped going 2 weeks prior to going missing. She had just stopped going to college. So she was a free spirit. She never thought twice about hitchhiking. And oddly enough, guys, Brenda Ball was actually acquaintances or friendly with one of Anne Rule's oldest daughters. Think about that one. What an odd connection. Anyway, she had gone to a bar that night. It was called the Flame Tavern. Her roommates remember last seeing her at 2 p.m. on May 31st. They just had some general conversation. They were going away that weekend, and Brenda told them that she might meet up with them later on. So she went to the Flame Tavern, and she was there all night until closing. She tried to get a ride with one of the band members that were playing that night, but he was going in a different direction. However, she was spotted with somebody in the parking lot. This somebody, of course, was a handsome man with brownish colored hair and his arm in a sling. People do remember seeing her at closing time talking to him out in the parking lot. From there, she, of course, completely disappeared. Now, she wasn't reported missing until about 19 days later. This was due to the fact that her roommates were used to her hitchhiking, so they thought she had just gone out with somebody, like they thought she had just gone off on an adventure. But after 19 days, it was too long. She had just been gone for too long. At that point in time, she had only gone out for 3-4 days and had always come back with all these tales. But now at 19 days, it was too long. So her friends were able, actually, they did some detective work on her on their own, and they were able to find out that Brenda hadn't called anybody, she hadn't been in contact with anybody, and also that her bank account had showed no activity in it whatsoever. So Georgianne Hawkins, which you guys, most of the time when you think of this case, I'm pretty sure Georgianne is in there. She was one of the most beautiful girls. We will eventually bring up some pictures of the missing girls as well, guys. She went missing. This was on June 10th. She was 18 years old. It was 1974 still. It was a killing year for Ted Bundy in 1974. So Ted was actually at this point in time leaving smaller gaps between when he attacked people. So you had the ones in January, not one really in February. You had one in March, April, May, end of May, start of June, and then June 10th. So she, once again, like many of the others, had long dark hair that she wore down and was parted in the middle. Georgianne was actually attending the University of Washington. So remember, Ted's at the University of Puget Sound at this point in time. He was at the University of Washington at one point in time. Just putting that out there. And she was part of the Kappa Alpha Theta sorority. So because of this, I don't know if sororities and fraternities are still a big thing. Here in Canada, they're not really. But when I was in school, we actually formed our own fraternity because mine was a co-ed dorm that we lived in. So I was Minister of Geese and Wildfowl. So shout out to East Beta Kappa, if any of you are watching. East Beta Gamma, that's what we were. So she was part of this sorority. And she lived on what was known as Greek Row because that's where the majority of the fraternity and sorority houses were on this particular street. She had a boyfriend who lived about 6 houses down from her, and he was part of the Beta Theta Pi frat house. So on that night, Georgianne and another one of her sisters had gone out to a party. They didn't stay for very long. Georgianne and the sister maybe had 1 or 2 drinks, and then Georgianne left early. She left early because she had a Spanish final the next day, a Spanish exam that she really wanted to cram for. So she was going to be studying that night. On her way home, she stopped off at her boyfriend's frat house. She only stayed there for about half an hour. This was to say goodnight to him. She was remembered, the fraternity brothers remembered seeing her leave. In fact, one of them said, "Hey, George," from out of his window. And she was only about 40 feet from her own door, guys, 40 feet from her own door when she disappeared into thin air. Nobody saw or heard anything. She just completely disappeared. Now, she was reported missing the next day by her house mother. She was supposed to have been home. Her roommate saw at 1:00 a.m. that she wasn't home. She waited until 3 and then told the dorm mother. And of course, they contacted the police in the morning because they were just waiting to see if Georgianne maybe had stayed at her boyfriend's house. Regardless, she was reported very early. And because she was such a cautious person, just like most of the other people that disappeared and was never known to hitchhike or anything like that, it was very, very strange and it was taken very seriously. So, like in the case of Susan Rancourt, stories started coming forward from people on campus who remembered incidents with, once again, a youngish looking brown-haired man. He was handsome and he had his leg in a cast and and he was with crutches at this point in time on this campus. So once again, he had the briefcase, he was dropping it, asking people to help him. And of course, Georgianne must have at some point in time helped him. This was an alleyway she disappeared in. Okay, I just want you guys to know that it was an alleyway. Although it was well lit, I'm just saying. So at this point in time, though, police hadn't revealed from Susan Rancourt's disappearance the arm sling stories, but they did come forward with a description of the man and with the fact that this man was somehow injured or was faking injuries. He either had his arm in a cast or his leg in a cast or a sling, and he was using crutches. So they did release that to the public. So what was Ted up to at this point? You guys are probably wanting to know. So he was still in law school at the University of Puget Sound. He was in night school there. If you guys remember, Ted Bundy never thought that going to night school was as legitimate as going to an everyday school. So he was not happy at the University of Puget Sound, and his marks were not well. For some reason, Ted did not do well on tests, so even exams. He was very good at orating. He was very good at remembering things in person, but on paper he just couldn't do it. And I know people that are like this as well. He just couldn't do it. So he wasn't doing very well at this point in time. Liz also remembers that they weren't getting along very well in the summer of 1974, the spring summer of 1974. They just weren't getting along very well. So she assumed, of course, and it was true, that he was seeing other women. This is kind of like Paul Bernardo. He was engaged to Carla, but he was still dating other women on top of raping and killing. He was still doing that. So there's a lot of similarities between Paul Bernardo and Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was the first person that showed America that evil didn't always have an ugly face. And about 15 years or so later, 13, 15 years later, Paul Bernardo was the first person that showed Canada that ugly didn't always have, or evil didn't always have an ugly face. Sometimes they can be handsome as well. So Liz could also remember the terror, the feelings of terror in the university district at that point in time. At that point, guys, 6 women had disappeared into thin air, and another woman had been beaten so severely, remember Karen Sparks, that she'd had permanent brain damage and she couldn't recall the incident at all. She'd also been sleeping when it happened. They did have one case that was in Oregon. Like I said, a lot of people didn't connect that to the Washington cases, but she was still out there. Ted told Liz that he was going to drop out of the University of Puget Sound. It just wasn't going well for him. He didn't believe that it was an accredited law school anyway, so he was just going to drop out at that point in time. And Liz encouraged him to do so. At this point in time, Ted actually reapplied to the University of Utah. Remember, he had been accepted into the University of Utah Law School, but he had deferred with that strange lie about being in a really severe car accident. He was in a car accident, but he'd only sprained his ankle. Regardless, he decided to reapply to the University of Utah, and of course, he got in. Liz also remembers at this point in time that their usually really active sex life, it was a big part of their relationship, was waning to the point of almost nothing in this summer. So I just want you to remember that as well, guys, probably because Ted was taking out his urges on other people, but I just want to say that. Ted seems to be disassembling at this point in his normal life. We'll call it his normal life, the life he presented to everybody on the surface. He was actually disassembling. He wasn't doing well, wasn't getting along with Liz, was dating various other people. He claims to have loved his mother and siblings very much, but I don't know if he really had a huge connection to them at this point in time once he moved out of the house. He just wasn't doing well in that area of his life. However, he was highly organized in his secret life because nobody could find proof of anything other than these descriptions, which actually matched thousands of other people in the area. Ted was also working in Olympia, which is about 2 hours away from Seattle at this point in time too. So he and Liz weren't really seeing each other that often either. So of course, Ted got into law school, like I said, in Utah, and he would be moving to the Salt Lake City area in the fall. Just give me 1 second, guys. You know it's a soda day. So on July 4th, Liz herself had a really disturbing incident, we'll call it an incident, with Ted. Okay, Ted owned a large yellow raft, and he had actually gotten it from Liz. She had given it to him as a present a couple years earlier. And so they often went rafting in the Washington area. He knew Washington really well. So they often went rafting in rivers and lakes and things of that nature. They were out that day. She wasn't paying much attention. She was sitting on the edge of the raft when Ted suddenly lunged at her and pushed her off into the freezing cold water. He was laughing while he was doing it, and Liz said, quote, "Our eyes locked. His face had gone blank, as though he was not there at all. I had the sense he wasn't seeing me," end quote. So I'm assuming this is the face that his victim saw before he tortured and killed them, before he did the things that he did to them. I'm assuming that's the blank face they saw, because Carol Durant describes something similar. We'll get into that. So was he planning on killing her at that point in time? It's hard to say for sure. I mean, it would have looked really suspicious for his girlfriend to show up missing. I'm just going to put that out there. Now, Liz believed that Ted, even after she knew what he was doing, would have never tried to kill her or Molly, her daughter. However, Ted actually confessed to trying to kill her at least twice. One of the times he actually closed her chimney flue. I don't know if they still use those things. I don't have a chimney, so I don't know, but she had a fireplace. So he closed the chimney flue and shoved towels under the door in an attempt to suffocate her with carbon monoxide. She woke up the next morning with a headache and never thought anything of it. She had no idea that Ted had done this until much later on when she heard about it herself. So of course, Ted zoned back in at some point in time, and he told Liz it had all been just a joke. So on July 7th, Ted told Liz that he was going with some friends that weekend, or he was going to go hang out with some friends. I believe he said it was a party, guys. And he told her he hadn't had a very good time when he went back. However, witnesses later recall seeing Ted walking along the shoreline at Lake Sammamish Park on July 7th. By himself. I believe at this point in time, he was just scoping out the area. He was looking for places that he could more easily abduct people from, I'm assuming. He was looking for areas in and around there that he could more than likely take victims and do whatever he was going to do to them without people knowing, without being in earshot of people. I really deeply believe that that's why Ted was at Lake Sammamish. It wasn't an area that he was known to frequent or go to that often from the sounds of it. So on Saturday, July 13th, Liz phoned up Ted and asked him to do something the next day, the 14th. Remember this date, it is actually important. And he told her no, he had, quote, other things to do, end quote. So oddly, he showed up at Liz's house on the morning of the 14th, and he started quizzing her about what she was going to do that day. And Liz told him she was going to go to a beach. She didn't know which one. She was just going to go to some beach. But he kept pressing her and demanding to know which beach she intended to go to. And finally, she just gave up and said that she was going to go to the, I just want to get it right, guys, Carkeek Park Beach. She was going to go there and hang out there that day. And he made some non-committal promises that he might see her, but in reality, he was making sure she wasn't going to Lake Sammamish Park that day. He came back to her house later that night. I can't quite remember the exact time, guys. I want to say around 7, but I could be wrong. I don't know if it was implicitly clear in the book what time he showed up, but anyways, they went out for burgers and ice cream after. Okay. So Lake Sammamish is about 19.3 kilometers from Seattle. It's not very far. And it was, I don't know if it still is, but it was a really popular place for people to go and hang out and do water sports or hang out at the beach. It's a very popular place. And it was a glorious day that day. 40,000 people were at Lake Sammamish Park that day. Okay, 40,000 people, guys. There was a beer bust going on from a local brewery. And there was also a police athletics association picnic going on as well. So there were police officers that were actually on the beach that day. So around 11:30 a.m., a woman remembers being approached by a youngish, handsome man with wavy brown hair wearing a white t-shirt and blue jeans. And he approached her to ask her for help with his sailboat. I believe it was like loading up his sailboat. He had his arm in a beige sling. And she actually walked to his car with him. And she noted his car was a brown metallic VW Beetle. Okay. Yeah. She noted that. I believe she also saw that the passenger seat was missing, but I can't remember. Sometimes the stories bleed together in my mind. She looked around and there was no sailboat in sight. And this man actually said, oh, the sailboat is a little farther from here at my parents' house up on the hill. She declined to go with him at that point in time. However, around 12:30, she remembers seeing this man again, okay, with a woman, a young, pretty woman, and they were walking along to the parking lot, and this woman was, well, I guess I should say Ted was actually, he had his arm in a sling, though. Think about that for a second. He was actually pushing a 10-speed bike with him, and the two of them were talking. So the woman, of course, that was with Ted was 23-year-old Janice Ann Ott. So Janice worked at, she was actually a caseworker for the King County Youth Service Center in Seattle. She'd been married for about a year and a half to her husband, Jim Ott. Jim was not around at this point in time. He was actually in California. He'd been there for some time and would be for some time for work. So Janice was very, very lonely at this point in time. She missed her husband. And she was a small girl. She was about 5 foot, and she had long blonde hair, of course, that she wore down and parted in the middle. Janice lived in Issaquah. I hope I'm saying it right. Issaquah. I think it's Issaquah. I hope I'm saying it right. Which is only about 6 minutes from Lake Sammamish Park. So that's why she had her bicycle. She rode her 10-speed bicycle to the park at that point in time. Now, of course, this man had actually approached several other people, but Janice was the one that said yes, she would help him. And like I said, she was seen with Ted. It's Ted. She was seen with him and her bike going towards the parking lot. Now, people in the area could actually hear the conversation that they had between the two of them. And Janice was known for being very dependable and very, very helpful towards other people. So it made actual sense that she agreed to help him, particularly people that were injured. At this point in time, Ted had changed from the blue jeans into white tennis shorts. Now, there could be several reasons for this. Number one, it was hot, so maybe it was too hot for blue jeans. Number two, a man wearing blue jeans on a crowded park would be more easy to spot and would be a little bit more, I don't want to say suspicious, but intriguing to people in the fact that he's wearing the blue jeans. Or it could be to throw people off, right? In the early morning times, he was wearing blue jeans. However, in the afternoon, he's now wearing white shorts. So he may have done it to throw people off. There could have been various reasons. Maybe he wasn't even conscious of why he did it. He just did it. Anyways, he was wearing tennis whites. That's what they call them now. And he was also wearing white sneakers. So like I said, people in the area did hear them talking, and they did hear that the man had asked for help with a sailboat. I believe this time it was unloading a sailboat, and that he introduced himself as Ted. Okay, he used his own name. This is really brazen that he used his own name. So he introduced himself as Ted, and he was affecting an accent of some point, or of some degree. People describe it as either a British accent or a Canadian accent. Like I said, I don't really have knowledge that I have an accent because I'm from here, I guess, but that's how people described it. Now, if you guys remember from the last video, Ted had a widow friend named Mrs. Sloan, and he actually used to practice a British accent on her, and he became quite good at it. Anyway, regardless, Janice Ott disappeared. They saw her walk away with him. I don't know whatever happened to the 10-speed bike either, guys. Ted got rid of it in some way. So Denise Nasland was 18 years old that day in July 14th of 1974. She had gone to Lake Sammamish with another couple and her boyfriend, and they had all gone together in Denise's car. Denise was 5'4". She was slender. She had dark eyes, long dark hair, parted in the middle, wore down, and she was known as being very cheerful and very dependable. So around 4, people once again were being approached by a man. I would say it was like slightly before 4, maybe like 3:45, 10 to 4, guys. People remember being approached by a man in tennis whites asking for help with a boat, and his arm was in a sling again. I'm guessing he did this because it worked before. It seems to have worked for him to be able to lure women in this way by feigning an injury. Most people believe if you have an injury or if you're disabled in some way, you're not going to harm them. So it was a good ruse for him to use. He was turned down, of course, by several people. And at about 4:30, people, the group that Denise was with, her boyfriend and the other couple, remember that she went to go use the public washrooms. Now, she was spotted in the washrooms by passersby talking to a woman. And it appeared that the two of them left together. I don't know if this was like, I don't think it was Ted dressed up as a woman. I think this was just a coincidence that she met somebody and they talked together and then they parted ways outside of the bathroom and people didn't see that. But no one saw Denise disappear. No one saw her with Ted at all that day. Friends described Denise as someone who would definitely help a person out, especially if that person was injured in some way. I think that was the work she was going to be doing, was working with disabled people and people with mental illnesses, particularly the young, but I think it was more disabled people. So she would definitely be up to helping somebody that needed her help. So I just want you guys to think about the audacity of this, that in brazen daylight, in front of 40,000 people, Ted Bundy took two girls from the same beach. And the beach had police officers on it. Remember, the Athletic Association picnic was going on at this point in time. In broad daylight, in the middle of the afternoon, he took two women on the same day. With only like a short stretch of hours between them, guys. Never used a fake name. He was, at this point in time, so confident that it didn't matter. And he also figured that people would think that the name he introduced himself as would be fake. He banked on that. He faked the same injury. He used the same excuses. It didn't seem to matter because it had worked before. Ted was using it now. He never tried to hide his face in any way. He never tried to hide his hair in any way. Nothing like that. He just never tried to do that. He took two women in the space of pretty much 4 hours, guys. If you think about it, he took two women in the space of 4 hours. Now, according to Ted later on, he took Janice, spirited her to wherever he killed her at, which I believe is the place they found the bodies later on, not that far from Lake Sammamish. That's why I said I think he was checking out the area. Assaulted her. Sexually assaulted her, guys. He was known to do this, right? He would vaginally, anally rape them, other things. Somehow restrained her. Went back, got Denise, brought her back. And then he claims he made one of them watch while he sexually assaulted the other one. He probably sexually assaulted them both, like at that point in time, making one watch the other one get assaulted. And then he made the other one watch as he killed one of them, you know, like, this is what I'm going to do to you. And then he killed the final one. All of this in a very short span of time, because if he took Janice Ott at 12:30 and he was at Liz's house by at least 7, think about that. That's 6.5 hours, guys, in order for him to kidnap, restrain, and rape and murder, all within 6 hours. And when he came back, he was completely normal. Liz remembers absolutely nothing different about him that night, other than the fact that he had a really healthy appetite, let's just say. And then he went out for burgers and ice cream with his girlfriend. Can you believe that? I'm sorry, just the audacity. So after these abductions, of course, were very, very big news, guys. Very big news, reported very early, very big news, particularly with Denise, because she was actually with people that she had driven there. So there were, of course, several witnesses to Janice's abduction, hearing about this man named that introduced himself as Ted, hearing about the sailboat. You had the woman that he approached at 11:30, actually seeing them go together to the parking lot, the fact that she was on a bike and that Ted was pushing the bike. So they figured it was her. And of course, with Denise, her friends were waiting on her. However, nobody had saw Denise disappear. Nobody had seen that. And nobody had seen her with Ted at that point in time. So like I said, he had used his real name. And I think it's because Ted banked on the fact that people, police and the others in the area, the witnesses, would have believed that using Ted was a fake name. However, Ted was a really common name at that point in time, guys. It was a short form for Edward. It was a short form for Theodore. There were many, 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 many men in the Seattle area that were named Ted. So he might have just been banking on that as well. They also assumed, police at this point in time also assumed that the sling was another ruse. They figured the man with the leg cast and the man with the arm cast from the earlier sightings, that was also a ruse. And it was, of course, but they figured that he was faking an injury. These disappearances were kind of a break in the case, though, because now they had multiple matching descriptions of this person, enough to put out a composite, right? Not only that, but they had a name. Regardless of if it was fake or not, they at least had a name. And they also had a description of a vehicle, which was described as metallic brown VW Beetle. Now, I just want to remind you guys that Ted's Beetle was actually a dull tan color. And this would be problematic in the case, kind of like with Paul Bernardo's car. It would be problematic. So originally, oh, I just want to show you guys the composite. Just give me 1 second to bring it up. Yeah, this one would probably be the best. So this is a composite. I hope you guys can see that. That's the composite that they would have had of Ted released after the Lake Sammamish abductions. So, of course, they quickly released the description, the car description, the name, everything of that nature, everything connected to the case to the public. And of course, the public is in deep, deep fear. I mean, this is a lot of people that have gone missing at this point in time. I believe it's 9 women. And of course, Kathy Sparks having been attacked as well. And people immediately, once the composite was put forth, actually started teasing Ted, saying, oh my God, it looks just like you, just like they had done with Paul Bernardo, right? So originally, because Ted, like Bernardo, had attacked in different police jurisdictions, not all of the cases were connected. They were, but they weren't. Okay, in the minds of some detectives, they were, and in the minds of some detectives, they weren't. A lot of them were in the Washington University district. A lot of them were in that area, but you did have some that were, hundreds of kilometers away, including one in Oregon, that most detectives still didn't believe was the same. And often at this point in time, and they still do it today, police jurisdictions did not want to work together. They weren't sharing information. They weren't giving each other descriptions. Kings County had at least 3 people that were missing from Kings County themselves. So I don't want to say they spearheaded it, but you usually hear more about the Kings County detectives due to this, in this case. So some of the cases, like I said, didn't believe they were looking for the same offender, nothing of that nature. And also, I do want to remind people that the composite, you guys saw the composite, could have looked like anybody. It was so average that it could have looked like any person. There were no tattoos that anybody saw, and Ted didn't have any anyway, but nobody saw any scars. Nobody saw anything that would be unique at this point in time. They did remember that he was tan. They did remember that, in fact, one person described him as 5'10". However, Ted was 6 foot, but I mean, who can judge really height at that point in time? And so at this point in time, police decided to focus on the car, it being the brown metallic VW Beetle. However, Ted drove a dull tan, and it wasn't metallic in any way Beetle. So police actually cleared him a couple times because of that. We're going to get into that, but they did. But it's almost like with Paul Bernardo, right? Witnesses can't always remember everything exactly. That's why they don't depend as much on eyewitness identification now as they used to. They still use it heavily, guys, but it's not as dependable. It's been proven not to be. But police focused on the color of this Beetle, just like they did with Paul Bernardo, right? The lady that talked about the information, talked about seeing the car, said, no, 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 no. It looks like a Camaro. She only said it looked like that, but police honed in on Camaro, so that's why Paul Bernardo was cleared a couple times, right? So eventually detectives did start to put the cases together. It didn't mean that they were sharing information or anything. They wanted all the glory of catching the suspect. But at the same point in time, they were connecting these cases, still leaving Oregon out to some extent, but still connecting the cases. And they started to believe they were looking for the same person. However, like I said, the man in the composite was so average, it could have been anybody. And I think Ted was banking on that as well. So the public was terrified. I mentioned it before, in 1974, 8 girls had disappeared. Yes, it was 8 girls. Sorry, guys. And one had been attacked so badly she had permanent brain damage. Of course, that was Karen Sparks. And no memory of the attack. I do want to remind you guys, though, that it's only mid-July. It's only mid-July. And the abductions were increasing in speed at this point in time. Remember, like I said, it's like 1 a month. Sometimes 2 a month, except for February. It doesn't seem like anything happened in February. I don't know why, but it just doesn't. Ted and Liz actually talked about the disappearances. They actually talked about them in a phone conversation. And he told her, quote, I guess Ted is going to be a hot name for a while, end quote. And, quote, I guess it's a good thing the guy didn't ask for help with a raft, end quote. Of course, there was no sailboat. However, Ted always talked about wanting to own a sailboat. So on July 22nd, a co-worker of Liz's approached her with the composite. Liz had already seen it, of course, in the news and in the newspapers itself, but he approached her with it. And he asked her, doesn't this look like somebody you know? Doesn't it resemble somebody you know? And she was like, oh, yeah, you know, like, could look like anybody, whatever. And and she did acknowledge it did look vaguely like Ted, I guess, kind of vaguely. And he had underlined the name Ted and was like, come on now. And he had also said, doesn't your Ted drive a Volkswagen Beetle? At this point in time, Liz was like, okay, yes, but it wasn't the same color as that one. And she just laughed it off. But it started to plant a seed in her mind. It started to make her very uneasy. So the conversation ended there, and Liz started turning over various things in her mind, like the fact that Ted was nocturnal, the fact that he would often disappear at night. He didn't really stay over at Liz's house that much, and he liked to drive around. Just putting that out there. She kept going all the information over and over in her mind because she did see the similarities between Ted and her Ted, but she was trying to dispel them in her mind by focusing on the car itself. Oh no, Ted doesn't drive, or Ted's VW doesn't look like that. It can't be him. Ted is a loving guy. He's kind. He's compassionate. It can't be Ted. Ted can't be doing this, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that somehow her Ted might be involved. Eventually, she told her friend Angie, which was her closest friend. They had actually moved from Utah, not together at different parts in time, but they had both actually moved from the same area in Utah. So they were friends. Yeah, that's right. Liz was from Utah originally. So they talked about it. And after Angie said, no, it couldn't be him, look at all the differences, she said to Liz, if it still feels like it's like this, maybe you should contact the police and just put your mind at ease. So she and Angie actually contacted the police. She had Angie call first. It wasn't so much as to give information, but to get information, particularly about the car. And they did tell the girls that, yes, because Liz called afterwards, Liz remembered that Ted wore a watch on his right hand. He was left-handed, I guess. And of course, left-handed people usually wear the watches on their right wrist. However, police told Liz, no, this man didn't have a watch on. There was no watch in the descriptions. So that kind of eased her mind. And of course, they once again focused on the color of the car because all reports said that it was a metallic brown VW. So this is the first time Liz has contacted the police. And of course, she feels really guilty, but at the same point in time, she didn't give any information on Ted. So it was just a way for her to ease her mind, but it didn't work like that. It did not work. Liz's mind would be forever in turmoil after this. So Liz started to descend into darkness at this point in time, guys. She was heavily drinking. In fact, she could not sleep at night without drinking. And she was trying to rationalize all the time the similarities between her Ted, and then trying to rationalize them with the differences between Ted and her Ted. She just kept telling herself it couldn't be possible, and yet it couldn't escape her mind that this Ted, the Ted that they were looking for, and her Ted could be the same person. She also remarked that Ted was hardly ever angry around her, although at one point when they were talking about his stealing, because like I said in the last video, she was particularly adamantly against his thievery. He loved to steal. Ted always stole. He loves to steal, guys. And she would bring it up with him, and he told her at one point in time that he would, quote, break her effing neck, end quote, if she brought it up again. So she did have that in her mind, but she never took it in the way that Ted meant it. It was really in the way that Ted meant it too. The feeling just wouldn't go away all summer long, all the time. The feeling just wouldn't go away. In fact, it just getting worse. So at this point, other people who knew Ted had also joked that he must be the Ted. Co-workers, other friends, people of that nature were jokingly saying that, just like they did with Paul Bernardo. Unbeknownst to Liz, Anne Rule, remember, because Ted and Anne Rule got to be very, very good friends from when he worked at the crisis clinic. They both worked together at the crisis clinic years earlier in Seattle together. She also was grappling with the fact that there were similarities between Ted and her friend, Ted Bundy. She noted that he matched the description and that he had lived in the University District. Anne didn't know where he lived at that point because they'd been out of contact for a little bit. Like I said, with Anne and Ted's relationship, they may be out of contact for a little while, but they could easily pick it up again. And he relied on Anne for certain things, much more in the future, you'll see. She was sure that it was just a coincidence, but she had a lot of contacts within the police force. Number one, she wrote true crime stories for Detective and other magazines. But number two, she had been a former police officer for Kings County. So she decided to call one of her detective friends and just see what she could find out. Just see, she wanted to relay her fears, just to put it out there, because she was a police officer. This is something that she should be doing. So she just wanted to see. She didn't think that Ted had a car, though. She didn't know that he'd had a car. Previous to him having the car, he used to just get rides from her. However, when she called the detective and she gave Ted Bundy's name, she was actually the first person to give his actual name. She said, I don't think he has a car, though. The officer was able to pull up the fact that Ted did indeed own a tan 1968 Volkswagen Beetle. And this kind of blew Anne's mind. She was like, oh my God, it just can't be the same person though. She was like, you know, hundreds of people own Volkswagen Beetles. Of course, they were very popular then as they are now. I don't know if you guys know it, but I love VW. I drive a VW. It's not a Beetle. It's not a Beetle. It's a Jetta. But I love VW. So it hurts me to connect it like that. A lot of serial killers drive VWs for some reason. But anyway, it was mind-blowing to her at this point in time. However, she was able to anonymously give this tip forward. She said, okay, you're going to have to present this to Kings County, guys. It's Theodore Robert Bundy. He's known to drive this, and you have to give the tip that he looks similar to the descriptions. Other people had come forward too, but she said, you have to give the tip, right? It's police work. You have to do it. You have to, even though you're close to that person, you got to get them checked out and cleared. She was hoping Ted would be cleared anyway. And she managed to put it out of her mind for a little while, because after talking to the detective again, she, quote, I heard nothing more to indicate that Ted Bundy was a viable suspect, end quote. They did check him out a couple times and nothing made sense. The police said they checked him out and he was cleared for whatever reason. So summer changed into fall, and Ted was busying himself planning with his move to Salt Lake City. Liz still, of course, couldn't shake the feeling that Ted and her Ted were the same person. She spent most of her days, guys, turning this over in her mind, trying to find out. Her mind kept coming up with similarities, and she was trying to justify them with the differences. She just could not believe it could be her Ted. At some point in the summer, Ted cut off all of his longish, wavy hair. You guys saw it. I'm just going to see if there's a picture in here, actually, guys, because Liz had quite a few pictures of her and Ted. Just give me 1 second. Sorry, guys. So this is one of her and Ted from 73. You can see his hair. Okay. So Ted at that point in time had actually cut it in the summer. Very, very, very short. And of course, this would be a way to throw people off, right? Well, I don't have that hairstyle. It's not me. Even though he'd had it previously, it was just another way for them not to identify him. He didn't know the police were onto him, because when I say they checked him out, it's not like they went to his house or anything. They just checked out what he drove and what he did. And they said, like, a law student wouldn't have done this. So Ted had another odd occurrence that summer with Liz's daughter, Molly, this time. Once again, they were out rafting, and Ted was in the raft. Molly was swimming behind him. Molly got tired and tried to get on the raft, but Ted wouldn't let her. He would purposely move forward so she couldn't grab hold of the raft. It was almost like he wanted her to drown. And every time she got close to the raft, he would just push himself forward so she couldn't get it. Eventually, she gave up and swam for shore. She was very tired. She was crying, and she was in disbelief that this could happen. So, of course, Liz got mad because Molly at this point in time would have been 7 or 8, guys. She would have been very, very young. And Ted told Liz that just because Liz babied her didn't mean that other people should, and that it was almost a way of him toughening Molly up, if you can believe that. So that day after the rafting incident, when she was Molly had dropped something in the car, and she was looking through the car like to find it. I think it was a sock, and she came upon a hatchet that was underneath the passenger seat in Ted's car. Ted told her that he had used it to cut down a tree at his parents' cabin. His parents also had a cabin in the area earlier the prior week, but it was also resting heavily on her head, a hatchet as well. When Ted, however, I do want to point out that when Liz was with Ted, all of her suspicions went out the window, because he just didn't seem like that kind of person. He seemed so normal, you know what I mean? Like, he was acting the same way. But when she was away from Ted, the suspicions always heightened in her mind. She was just too many connections. So that summer, Ted started working at the Washington State Department of Emergency Services. And this was, again, working on the budget. Remember, he had done this previously for Kings County, so he was working on the budget for them. And it was here that he met a woman, a coworker named Carol Ann Boone Anderson. And you guys know she's going to play a big part in this later on. And it was Carol Ann that would tease him mercilessly about the fact that he looked like Ted. In August, Liz called police again. Okay, the suspicions were just getting to be too much for her. She told them all about her suspicions, including the fact that when she was in Ted's room at one point in time, remember he still lived in a rooming house, when she was in his room, she saw a pair of crutches. He told her that the crutches belonged to his landlord, but she'd seen them there regardless. She said, quote, She said, quote, "I'm not sure he's involved. I'm just worried. Some things fit and some things don't," end quote. However, she refused to give Ted's name, and she hung up on the officers. It was just getting to be too much for her. So she actually went through the gas receipts that were in his car. A lot of people do this. He kept like gas receipts in his visor, and she went through them to see if he had gassed up in any of the places where people had disappeared from, or like bought supplies anywhere from the areas that the girls had been disappearing from. She also searched his room, guys, and she ended up stealing an envelope of credit card receipts. I believe it was from May of 1974, in the hopes to see if anything would connect up. But it was more for her to dispel her fears at this point in time. She was acting like a detective, but these were in the hopes of dispelling the fears. However, they only heightened her fears about Ted at this point in time. But she still could not get away from him, guys, because like I said, when they were together, she was very much in love with Ted, and when they were together, things were fine. She even helped him finish his budget. I don't know if you guys knew this, but Ted Bundy was not organized like people thought he was. He was actually an extreme procrastinator, and he waited basically until the very last few hours to get the budget done. And so it was Liz that actually helped him finish it and get it out on time. So on Labor Day weekend of 1974, Ted had packed up all his belongings, guys. Nobody had disappeared in August. Ted had packed up all of his belongings and relocated to Salt Lake City, Utah for law school. Now, Liz remembers that they made many promises to stay together. They had decided to stay together. He had once non-committally told her she could come if she wanted to, but it didn't sound like an actual invitation to her, like they were going to shack up or anything, so she didn't pay it that much mind. It didn't seem like an actual offer. And he moved. The disappearances in Washington ended at this point as abruptly as they had started. They ended. So Liz and Anne Rule were not actually the only ones that had reported Ted. Another coworker, not Carol Lampoon, a different one, had reported Ted to the police as well. And so did one of his former university professors. They all reported him. On September 6th of 1974, the bodies of Denise Naslund and Janice Ott were finally located. So they didn't have any of the bodies, any of the other bodies. It was actually the last two victims that were located first, but this would be a good 2 months after they had disappeared, almost 2 months after they had disappeared. In fact, a road worker had a worker for Kings County had actually been in that area in August and had spotted them, but he didn't think they were bodies. He thought that they were actually deer carcasses. So in August, they would have still had flesh on them, but at this point in time in September, they were completely bones, guys. There was no flesh, there was no nothing. There was nothing in the area. They were only bones. And they were scattered due to animals and other reasons, but they were scattered as well. They were not complete skeletons either, as far as I could tell. They were just parts of them. However, they located not one, not two, not four even, but 5 femur bones. 5. There's only 2 bodies there. Why are there 5 femur bones? Ted actually later admitted to leaving 3 bodies there. But the pathologist involved in this particular area of the case thought that there could have been 4 bodies in that area. So 2 victims have never been found, guys, from Washington State, and that would be Georgianne Hawkins and Donna Manson. Their bodies still haven't been found. He confessed to them, but their bodies have never been found. So it could very likely have been bones from the 2 of them also in this area. These are areas that Ted knew. He knew Washington State. That's why he was more easily able to hide bodies in Washington State, because he knew it better than any of the other states he visited. I just want to put that forth. No one knows for sure, though, even to this day, who the extra bones came from. And Denise and Janice were actually identified through their skulls, but they were like pieces of skulls and jawbones. So they knew definitively that the girls were there. Ted settled into life on campus in Utah fairly easily. He got a couple jobs. I don't think he worked them at the same point in time. He had one job as a building manager, and then the second job he had was as campus security. Interesting. He still carried on his long distance relationship with Liz. He was calling her quite often, saying he loved her and stuff like that, but he was dating dozens of women, dating and bedding dozens of women from Utah as well. So Salt Lake City is actually the capital of Utah. You guys probably know this. The city itself, because Salt Lake City is also a district, it's also a county. There's Salt Lake County and there's Salt Lake City. So we're just focusing on Salt Lake City. So it has a population of 200,567 people, and it's most well known for being steeped in the Mormon religion. Brigham Young actually founded Salt Lake City himself after he took over for Joseph Smith as head of the Mormon Church in the 1800s. It's also well known for its outdoor sports, and it hosted the Winter Olympics in 2002. So on October 18th of 1974, Melissa Smith, who was 17 and the daughter of Midvale, Utah's police chief, disappeared. Okay, she was 17. She was 5'3", and she had long light brown hair that she wore down and was parted in the middle. Midvale is about 15 minutes, I believe. Yeah, about 15 minutes from Salt Lake City. And it's a smaller town. She went missing. Now that day, she went over to console a friend, right? Her friend and a boyfriend had gotten into a fight. And so being a good person, because from everything I've read, Melissa Smith was a very good person, very dependable, very caring. She went over to, comfort her friend and make sure she felt better. But Melissa also had other plans that night. She was going to go to a sleepover. Before going to the sleepover, she was going to stop at her house to collect her night things and things of that nature. So she did leave her friend's house, but she never made it to her house to collect her night things. And of course, she never made it to the sleepover either. Now, being the daughter of the police chief, Melissa was well versed in stranger danger, and she knew to be cautious, but it didn't seem to matter. She was still snatched off the streets. Her body was actually found 9 days later. So this is a big deal, guys, because they'd never had, I'm sorry, I have to say it this way. Please don't come for me. Fresh corpses from any of the missing girls. Hers was like the freshest that would show things. And it was found 9 days later near Summit Park, which is close to the Wasatch, I hope I'm saying it right, mountain area, about 28 minutes from Midvale itself. So what would that be? Probably 43 minutes from Salt Lake City. Hers was the first body, like I said, fresh enough for them to see what Ted had actually done, the marks Ted had actually done to these people, to see definitively what he'd done. Other than Karen Sparks, who of course had lived, but he had changed somewhat from them in the ways he attacked people. So she had been badly beaten with some type of object. Police felt it could be a crowbar or a pry bar due to the marks that it left on her skull. She was bruised everywhere on her body, but she was particularly savagely beaten in the face region, the face and the head region. And she had also been strangled with one of her own stockings, one of her own blue stockings. I'm assuming stockings are like nylons, guys. Although I know some only go up to the knee and some go up to the thigh. So that's what I'm putting forth. They're not socks. They're kind of like a see-through material. To me, the fact that he attacked their faces so much seems indicative of the fact that he was trying to erase their identities. I don't think it was so much so that they wouldn't be identifiable to the police. I think it was that he was trying to erase the fact that they looked so much like Stephanie Brooks. Remember his first love that he wanted to get revenge on? But they could have also reminded him of his mother, if you guys think about it. He had an extreme hatred for women. Ted Bundy loved women, but he hated them at the same point in time. He could turn it off and on like nobody's business. Oh, and there were other reports of people that had dated him that mentioned that too. There were points in time when it seemed like he hated women, even though for the most part, he wasn't like that. Because there was so little blood in the area though, where Melissa had been found, police assumed she had been killed, and probably rightly so, elsewhere, and had been moved. Ted later admitted, it's disgusting, but Ted later admitted that he had actually come back and washed her hair within those 9 days to keep her fresher looking. There are reasons for it, but we're not going to get into that until the third installment. Sorry, guys. So sometime between Halloween night and November 1st in Lehi, Utah, which is about 30 minutes from Salt Lake City, 17-year-old Laura Amy disappeared. So she had been out that night and she had left a cafe. As far as I know, she had had some alcoholic beverages and she had left the cafe to go to a park. She disappeared at some point in time between leaving the cafe and going to the park. This was just after midnight, and that's why I said it was like Halloween night / November 1st. She was actually exceptionally tall, guys. She was almost 6 foot, very slender. She had long hair, which she wore down and parted in the middle, and she had a habit of hitchhiking, just like Brenda Ball and Donna Manson. She had a habit of hitchhiking and going out on a whim whenever she felt like it. She'd actually just dropped out of school, high school actually, and had moved in with friends away from her parents' home. However, she kept in daily contact with her parents. She never missed talking to her parents for a day. So though she was living with friends, she still stayed in contact with her parents' house. However, they had no idea that Laura was missing until 4 days later, when they called her roommates, her friends, asking why they hadn't heard from their daughter in so long. 4 days was just too long. They heard from her every day, right? And this was now 4 days they hadn't heard from her. So they wanted to speak to her, and the friends said, of course, you know, we haven't seen her since Halloween. And her parents became immediately suspicious. Her friends had just thought that she was out hitchhiking. So it wasn't until her parents called them up that they became suspicious. Her body was actually found November 27th of 1974 in the Wasatch Mountains once again. And she was found by hikers. Like Melissa, she was naked. I don't know if I mentioned that. Melissa was naked. With her face so badly beaten that you could not tell who she was at this point in time. She had to be identified through dental records. Like the other bodies found so far, there was no clothing in the area, no jewelry, no ID. It was just the body. That was it. And she had also been strangled with nylon stockings. Her body bore marks signaling that she was likely killed elsewhere because she bore drag marks. And also the deep gouges in her head, once again, appeared to be either made from a crowbar or a pry bar, just the marks themselves. Police could tell that she had been sexually assaulted both vaginally and anally, and they were actually able to get semen samples, but the samples were too degraded for them to blood type. Okay, so back then, of course, like you guys know, there's no DNA. It's not even been thought of until the 80s at that point in time. So there is no DNA. All they did was blood type people to see if you were AB, A, B, positive, negative, O, a secretor or a non-secretor. This person was a secretor. Ted Bundy was a secretor, and his blood type was O. But they couldn't, it was too degraded for them to even type at this point in time. So Liz and Angie, like I said before, had both come from Utah. And Angie had gone down in that fall to visit her family. When she came back, she told Liz that girls were disappearing and showing up murdered in Utah. The murders had stopped in Washington at this point in time, but they'd picked up in Utah, oddly enough, after Ted had relocated there. She, of course, wanted Liz to go to the police. And oddly enough, Liz did tell Ted when Denise and Janice's bodies were found. And after that, in another phone call after that, he kept asking if any more bodies had been found. And it really freaked Liz out that he was so fixated on that. So Liz told her suspicions, of course, again to the police. She called police again after this and did tell them people are going missing in Utah. And, you know, she called him her friend. My friend lives there. She told police girls were going missing in Utah and at least one body had been found. She told police about all of her suspicions, you know, the matching descriptions, the hatchet, the crutches, the fact that he had plaster of Paris in his room that he had stolen from his surgical supply job before, and had said something along the lines of, "You'll never know when you might break a leg." He'd actually said that to her. The detective asked her, actually, if she was talking about Theodore R. Bundy. Remember, Anne Rule had called him in. And she said yes. He told her that Ted had already been checked out and that he'd been cleared. However, he wanted to meet with her and get further information from her. So during the meeting, Liz provided that Ted liked to steal things, that he'd lost almost all interest in sex that summer, that they tried bondage because, of course, they asked about her sex life. She was so uncomfortable, but of course they have to ask about it. That they tried bondage at least 3 times prior, but she had told Ted she didn't like it, so they stopped. In reality, the reason why they stopped was because on the last occasion, Ted had tried to choke her, and Liz was like, no, I'm not having any of that. She told them about finding the plaster of Paris, and she also remembered the crutches and told them about that. I've already mentioned that. And Liz gave her personal info. This is the first time she gave her personal info to the detectives at this point in time. And also gave them 3 photos of Ted through the various years, because she had many photos of Ted. You guys know from in the book as well. Lots of the pictures that you've seen, even this picture right here, that's Liz right there, and that's Ted. So they had many pictures. She gave them to the detective. He became really businesslike at that point in time, and she asked him, you know, to check it out. So the detective delayed going to the witnesses that they had from Lake Sammamish at that point in time. He even went on vacation before he actually even showed the picture around. I just want to put that out there. Liz was now consumed by the guilt as well as the suspicion. But the more consumed by guilt and suspicion she became, the more Ted called her. So it was odd. She felt horrible that she'd gone to the police and actually reported his real name. She didn't tell him, of course, that she had done this at this point in time. She just was consumed by the guilt that she had done so. Eventually, the witness, the best witness that they had from Lake Sammamish, which would probably be the 1130 girl, was shown the picture of Ted Bundy, and she said that he looked too old to be the person that she saw. So detectives said, hey, he's been cleared once again. He's been twice cleared at this point by the police. On November 8th of 1974, 18-year-old Carol Durant was browsing in a bookstore in Murray, Utah, which is about 12 minutes from Salt Lake City, when she was approached by a man who started asking her questions about her car. She figured that he was a policeman, and it was especially bolstered when this man said, you have to come with me. I think your car has been broken into. Now, Carol drove a Camaro, so she definitely cared at this point in time. So she did go with the officer. She remembers the person she assumed was an officer. She remembers he had a mustache and that he was wearing patent leather shoes. He also had wavy brown hair. She remembers that. So Ted's hair had grown out a little bit at this point in time. She did ask for his credentials because she assumed he was a police officer, and he kind of just laughed it off and made her feel bad for asking. So she checked out her car and she noticed that nothing was stolen from it. And at this point in time, the officer said, the officer, the one she assumed was an officer, said that she had to come with him because his partner had probably already nabbed the thief. So they had to go to the police station, even though her car wasn't broken into. But she was a very trusting and naive girl. So she was taught to trust authority. And she really did believe that this man was a police officer. Eventually, he told her that his name was Officer Roseland, and he flashed a badge at her, but he did it so fast she couldn't see anything other than this like gold-colored looking badge. She couldn't see anything else of it. He got her into his car. Okay. And he immediately started speeding away in the opposite direction of the police station. So at this point in time, she knows she's in trouble. Carol recalled that he seemed, quote, removed from her, and that, quote, his jaw was set at this point in time. He no longer had a smile on his face. He was no longer jovial, anything of that nature. So just as suddenly as the car sped up, they pulled up and stopped in front of an elementary school. And he lunged at her and tried to put cuffs on her. He was able to get cuffs on one wrist of hers, but Carol started fighting back. And when I say Carol fought back, man, did Carol ever fight back. They're in the car at this point in time, and they're fighting, and she's struggling with him. He manages to get the cuff on, but on the same wrist as the other one. He missed, and he wasn't able to put it on both of her wrists. So she has the cuffs, but they're on only one wrist. And she's fighting. This made her fight even harder. At one point in time, Ted produced a gun. This was like a small black pistol, and told her, quote, If you don't stop screaming, I'm going to kill you. I'll blow your brains out, end quote. Suddenly, somehow the gun fell. I don't know if maybe she kicked it and the gun fell. And he came up with a crowbar at this point in time. That's why I kept mentioning that the marks from the bodies found in Utah showed crowbar marks. He showed up with a crowbar. Somehow, Carol was able to get out of the car. And so this confrontation is kind of like going on outside of the car. She managed to kick Ted in the junk. Thank God for that. Thank God that she was a fighter. She managed to do that. And she, of course, ran from him into the path of an oncoming car. Now, this car was driven by a couple who were so startled and scared by the way Carol looked that they didn't want to stop. In fact, the woman started to lock the doors, but Carol, having luck on her side, was way faster than they were and was able to get into the car before the locks could go down. She, of course, spilled out her story and they immediately drove her to the police station. Carol DeRanche is the only surviving victim that remembers a confrontation with Ted Bundy. Okay, there is another one. Her name is Rhonda Stapley. She wrote a book about it much later on. She said that she had PTSD and that these were repressed memories. So I can't say for certain if she really did have a run-in with Ted Bundy or if it was with another serial killer. So that's why I said that Carol DeRanche, at this point in time, for sure, but Carol DeRanche is basically the only surviving victim that can provide details. She hadn't been hit in the head or anything like that. Her memory was not faulty, anything of that nature, and she managed to get away. And she, I mean, they were together for a period of time, too. She was the best evidence they had, the police had, at this point and in the future. So police immediately were able to connect Carol's case with that of Melissa Smith and the missing Laura Amy. Remember, at this point in time, they hadn't found Laura's body. And police were also no, it wasn't police, it was Carol herself, found blood on the collar of her coat. And she knew it wasn't her blood, so she sent it in to be tested. And of course, it came back as O positive blood. It came back as Ted's blood type. Though police canvassed the area just immediately after Carol came in, they weren't able to find Ted's car. Why weren't they able to find his car, you might ask? Because Ted was actually 21 minutes away in Bountiful, Utah, abducting 17-year-old Debbie Kent. I'm just going to tell you this last little bit. We're almost there, guys. We're almost done for this video. So Debbie was actually attending a play at the local high school with her parents that night. The drama teacher that was actually putting the play on remembers being approached by an official looking man with a mustache, wavy brown hair. He was tall, he was slender, he was handsome, and he was wearing patent leather shoes. And he asked her to come out and ID a car with him. She declined, however, because of course she's putting on the play and she felt kind of uneasy. During the second act, Debbie volunteered to go and pick up her brother. He was at a local roller skating rink. You know, like roller rinks were like big in the 70s. I think they're coming back though. So she was going out. Her brother was there and he'd wanted to be picked up by 10 o'clock, but the play was going to go over 10 o'clock. So she was going to go and pick him up and then come back and pick up her parents later on. She never made it to go pick up her brother. And she never made it to come back, of course, for her parents. And Debbie Kent was, of course, slender, medium height, long hair that was wore parted in the middle, same descriptions of every other girl that he picked up. So she was actually abducted from the school parking lot, which was probably what he was going to do to the drama teacher. And she would serve as the person that would fulfill his urges. So even though he'd barely gotten away from Carol DeRanche, well, I should say, even though Carol DeRanche had just escaped from him and was going to the police, he had to have known she was going to the police. Even though she was going to do that, and it should seem like Ted would want to lay low, he didn't do that. He went 21 minutes away to Bountiful and picked up another girl so that he could fulfill whatever dark urges he had, these urges that he had. He was very intent on doing this. She was, of course, immediately reported missing. This is still November 8th, guys, because she never came for her brother. So police canvassed the area, and this would be Viewmont High School. the next day searching for clues as to how she was abducted into thin air. And they were able to locate a small key in the parking lot area. That key was a handcuff key, and it fit perfectly into the set of cuffs that were on Carol DaRonch that night. And that's where we're going to leave it, guys. I do want to say, though, that they were also, of course, due to Carol DaRonch, able to connect her with Debbie Kent. And because they'd connected her with Debbie Kent, and also were able to connect her with Melissa Smith and Laura Amy, they connected all of these. They're much better in Utah. Maybe not so many jurisdictions, I guess, to get in the way, but they were able to connect the cases, all four of these cases at this point in time. And that's where we're going to leave it, guys. What do you think? What do you think so far? I'm not going to ask you about his mental state at this point. We're going to save that for another video. We did discuss it in the first one. Who do you believe was the third body that was there with Denise and Janice, or possibly even the fourth body? Because remember, the medical pathologist thought that there was at least 4 bodies there. Who do you think they were? I'm going to put forward that they were probably Georgianne Hawkins and oh man, and Donna Manson. I'm going to say that they were probably them, but who's to say for sure? Why do you think they haven't tested the DNA from those bones at this point in time? They could find out now. I wonder why they haven't done that. What do you make of the abductions from 2 women of 2 women in a crowded park with police officers?